So the iPad 10th generation and the iPad 9 are two iPads that came out a couple of years ago, but let's go and see how they both compare in 2024. There's rumors that the successors of these two iPads are going to come out. Is it going to come out? I guess we'll see what happens, but let's go and see. Now, first of all, if you want to pick up either one of these iPads, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both of these particular iPads, on the front of the iPad 9th generation, we had a 10.2-inch Retina display. It was a pretty good panel. I thought it was pretty good when it first came out, and it still looks like a pretty good, sharp panel. I think if you're in the market, you can't really go wrong with it. It's not the best panel of all time, but I do think Apple did a good job with it. You have a Touch ID sensor on the front and overall, a little bit of bezel on it, definitely more bezel than the iPad 10, but I still think it's a fairly good display. With the iPad 10th generation, we are now getting a 10.9-inch liquid Retina display, so it's a bigger panel than the iPad 9. It's also, I would say, a better looking device. I mean, you have less bezel on it, comparatively, but both of these have Touch ID sensors. It's just the iPad 10 is shoved into the power button at the very top or on the side, which is kind of nice. The iPad 9 is on the front, so you have more bezel on the iPad 9, but the displays are probably more similar than not, to be honest. Now, around the bodies, the iPad 9 is this rounded shaped iPad. The iPad 10 has this flat side to it. The iPad 10 definitely looks a lot more modern than the iPad 9 as well. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Like if I'm looking at an iPad to kind of have as like a everyday type of iPad, I probably would want mine to look like the iPad 10 because it does look like the overall better one when it comes down to it. The Lightning port on the iPad 9 is still fine too, but the USB Type-C port on the iPad 10 is significantly better as far as I can tell. And once again, I'd probably rather have that type of iPad on the iPad 10 than the iPad 9's the lack of USB Type-C port on the iPad 9. On the backside, complete flat backs on both, single camera setup at the top left on both of them, but the iPad 10's camera is bigger, and we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing to keep in mind too, you have a couple more color selections that you can choose from with the iPad 10. When the iPad 9 was only like space gray and this like silver model, the iPad 10 didn't have space gray, but it is giving you a couple more of the cooler or like wackier colors to kind of choose from if you're really into it. So from the exterior, that kind of covers it up there. From the camera side, you were probably getting a significantly better camera on the iPad 10. The thing is, you were getting the 8 megapixel wide angle camera on the iPad 9, 12 megapixel sensor on the iPad 10th generation. I do think that is the overall better one here. Like if I'm going to go ahead and buy one, I like that camera more so than I like the camera on the iPad 9, but you're still getting very similar front-facing cameras, landscape, or the ultra-wide cameras on both, which again is very nice to have, but I do think if I'm getting one particular camera, I would rather have the iPad 10 than the iPad 9. On top of that, I'd probably tell you, from a software perspective, the iPad 10 is probably going to win here as well. The iPad 10 only has like one generation newer chipset than the iPad 9, so I would assume that that particular device is going to last at least one extra year on top of the iPad 9. It could be more, it could be the same, but it's not going to be less. The iPad 9 has a higher likelihood of not lasting as long as the iPad 10. Again, that's just kind of how these things go. So you're going to be getting a longer lasting device from the iPad 10th generation, presumably, than the iPad 9th generation when it comes down to it. On top of that, the performance is probably going to be more or just better in general on the iPad 10. You are getting a newer chipset on the iPad 10 as well. So the iPad 10, the Apple A14 Bionic chip, where the iPad 9 had that Apple A13 Bionic chip inside. I will still tell you for a lot of different reasons, the iPad 10, is probably going to be the better iPad, from a performance perspective. And also, I think it looks kind of better, so it could give you the impression that it might be a better iPad in some ways. But I would still tell you the iPad 9 is still very, very nice in a lot of other ways too. If you're going through and you're a student and you're taking notes and stuff, both these support basically the same type of Apple Pencils, but the USB Type-C Apple Pencil is supported on the iPad 10, which is nice. The Apple Pencil 1 is probably better suited for the iPad 9, but I will still tell you if you're just somebody who's going to just run through a lot of, just random applications and you're not really looking for the most powerfully intensive thing, you will still totally be okay with the iPad 9. I think that was a very good, iPad Apple made, and they really killed it, I would say, in a lot of different ways on that particular iPad. But if you are in the market and you're wanting a better, iPad, clearly the iPad 10th generation is probably the one I would recommend a majority of people to buy. I think that is the one that I would look at and be like, okay, this is a no-brainer, just buy this one, but it is significantly more money. I think the iPad 9 is a very good iPad. It's significantly cheaper in the used market and every market you can think about. So just kind of keep that in mind. But regardless, that's kind of how I see both these iPads kind of holding up and comparing in 2024. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.